One of my beta readers has just given me some pretty brutal feedback. I did ask for brutal honesty and I am very grateful that they gave me that, but it doesn't make processing the feedback any easier. So what I thought we'd do in this week's video was to have a look at some of the detailed feedback that I've gotten and unpack it together. Hey, it's Deborah with another video on the business side of self-publishing. I want to talk about how to deal with brutal feedback for two reasons. One, because we're all going to deal with it as authors every day. You cannot make everybody happy. 1 and 2 star reviews are going to come in and you are going to get pretty savage reviews no matter how much time and effort and investment you've put into them. It's really tempting to dismiss that feedback and only look at the feedback from the people who love your books, but that would be a huge mistake. You learn way more from 1, 2, and 3 star reviews than you do from the 4 and 5 star reviews. And number 2 is, in fact, the thing that really sets top performers apart from everybody else is their ability to take feedback. A lot of people haven't been equipped with the knowledge of how to actually deal with feedback. It's really weird because we've got all this training in school, in university, and in the workplace on how to give people effective feedback, but we never seem to really give people training on the other side of the equation. Being able to take feedback is one of the most important skills you'll need as a business person, and I would personally rank it right up there with self-reflection. I'm going to break down the 5 steps that I personally use whenever I get some brutal feedback. You can use this method to deal with any sort of feedback, even from somebody who doesn't know how to give effective feedback. You're always going to have an emotional reaction to the feedback. It's just inevitable. And the reason for that is we actually have 2 systems of thinking. System 1 does all of the instinctual kind of necessary for survival thinking. Our system 2 thinking, though, is responsible for all of the analytical thought and other higher cognitive processes. System 1 is your threat detector. It is constantly scanning all of the new information coming in to see whether or not it is a threat to you. Whenever we get feedback from someone saying that what we've written didn't work for them, System 1 actually kicks in first and perceives that piece of feedback as a threat before we can activate our System 2 thinking. So when I woke up this morning and saw this piece of feedback, I went to my writers group Discord and just kind of went and wailed in there and said, they hate this, this chapter is the worst. Oh God, my book is terrible. I'm a terrible author. I should destroy the manuscript. I should just have never thought about publishing this in the first place. So emotional reaction, I've had that. And yeah, specifically, I was at this point in this particular cycle of the graph. It was not good. It was not good. It is a completely irrational thing to be freaking out about, and also, quite frankly, totally out of my control. System 1 thinking is always on, and it's always going to be faster than System 2. So the only thing you can really do is find a safe space to vent. So just let yourself experience all the emotions, because until that happens, your System 2 thinking has no chance to kick in. Once you've had a chance to calm down, you can go back to the feedback and try to pull it apart. And what I recommend doing is splitting the feedback up between objective elements and subjective elements. Objective feedback is really easy to take because it's cut and dry. It's either right or it's wrong. So in this particular section, this particular beta reader is confused about continuity. And looking at their comment, I don't have any explanation, because immediately prior to the section that is highlighted, you get a description of this character showing visible reservation about talking to the protagonist. And then right after this section that's highlighted, you get the protagonist seeing that this character who's reacting to her is not really that happy about talking to her. As this other beta reader has said, there is enough context surrounding it that my only conclusion is the first beta reader has not been reading carefully. So when it comes to that particular piece of feedback, I'm not going to do anything about this section. It's working just fine. Beyond just typos and spelling errors and things like that, I also include word choice to some extent, because they have suggested a change in the word choice I've used here. Using looped instead of loped conveys a very different image of what is going on in the scene, and that's very easy to deal with. You either take it or you dismiss it, and you don't need to angst over it. Subjective feedback is more difficult to deal with, and that's what makes the beta read process so much fun, because by the time your beta readers get your manuscript, it should be like 90 25% subjective feedback that they're giving you. The thing to keep in mind when dealing with subjective feedback is that the reader's reaction is always valid. If somebody says, I did not enjoy that, or I did not like that, or I was offended by that, that is their system one reaction to the words that you wrote. You can't deny somebody else's emotions. However, what you can do is contextualize their response to figure out whether it's an issue with your writing or an issue with your choice of beta reader. I'm not going to get into how to find beta readers because that would be like a whole nother video, but suffice to say, what you should be looking for in an ideal beta reader is that it is somebody who is your target audience for your book. If the feedback is coming from somebody who is not in your target audience, their emotional reaction is not necessarily going to be the one that you wanted to elicit. Go ahead and ignore it. And you are totally allowed to do that because they're not your target audience. So who cares? If they are your target audience though, that's where you need to dig deeper. And generally in those cases, they're having that emotional reaction and giving you that particular feedback because something in the text did not align with their expectations. I look at expectations in two categories. So the first category is whatever the reader brings with them to the text. And that's going to be based on their lived experiences and the kinds of books and authors that they've read. So a reader who has only read things like Brandon Sanderson and Will Wyatt, where things are fast-paced and the exposition is extremely clear, they're going to struggle when they try to read Stephen Erickson's Malazan series because there is like no exposition ever. If you have a reader who has worked in a particular field of expertise, let's say medicine or aviation or architecture or something like that, then they're going to bring a different set of experiences and expectations to reading your work. Sometimes that's a good thing because they'll point out all of the holes in your world building research. Other times, not so much because they kind of overthink things and you're just like, please just sit back and enjoy the story. I am hand waving this with magic. The only way you can really influence what expectations your readers bring with them is to be discerning when you're picking your beta readers. However, you've got a lot more control over setting expectations in your text. Whenever I look at a piece of critical feedback, the first thing I try to deconstruct is what was their expectation? And then I try to diagnose whether that expectation is something that I've set up directly in my text or whether it's an expectation that they brought with them based on their previous lived experience. Once I know which of those two it is, I can actually then diagnose what I need to do about it. If it's an expectation that you've set up, then that's kind of much easier to diagnose because you can go back and look at your previous scenes, your previous chapters, and the tone and character and plot promises you've made to see where you might have caused your reader to have a different expectation to the one that you wanted them to have. When it comes to their own lived experience though, it's a little bit trickier because it is true to their lived experience, but equally everybody experiences things differently. So you need to assess whether or not their lived experience is relevant to whatever is going on in the scene or with that character. My general rule of thumb is if they've had that experience and I personally haven't, then I will take their feedback because it is an area where I haven't lived it, I haven't experienced it, and therefore I'm no authority on that subject and I should listen to somebody who is. If the reader and I both have lived that experience and we disagree with each other, then usually my gut instinct will be to go and get some more data points because different people can react differently to the same experience. It does not mean that their experience invalidates my experience, nor does it mean that my experience invalidates their experience. It's just to get a better feel for how more people are likely to perceive the way that character or that scene lands. Only then can you really decide what you're going to do with that feedback in terms of how extensive a revision you're going to make or whether you're going to take that feedback on board at all. Feedback is just feedback. It's just an indication of how other people are reacting to your writing. Let's actually have a look at what the feedback is and try and break it down. What they disliked the most in this chapter was they felt like there should be some sort of reaction to the death that they discovered. They have some very specific questions, which I did not explore in that particular scene or that chapter. That probably is the reason why they've had a major issue with the plotless structure, simply because they felt like there should be some other scene that happens in between. The other particular feedback that is here is this comment about characters coming off as one note and callous or super focused. I'm having a hard time cheering your protagonist on at this point. If I was talking about your books with friends, I would bring up this chapter and discuss my disappointment in the characters with them. Here is the beginning of the scene. The comment here is the main question on my mind is, how is your protagonist handling this? So if I scroll a little further down and have a look at the second inline comment, their complaint is we don't get a lot of the protagonist's internal thoughts on seeing her friend die, and everything is moving too fast, and that all I can say is she's angry. Clearly there are actually two distinct things. There is the dislike, which is a personal preference of how the prose is constructed. So it seems to me that this person expects there would be a whole lot more explicit internal narration about thinking about the character who died and their relationship and what that character meant to that person. So it is absolutely valid for this person to dislike how I've written this. Whereas I don't like leaning on the crutch of having very explicit narrations. I like having nuance in my reading. I like unreliable narrators, and my protagonist certainly is not a very reliable narrator. There are things in her narration that you need to pick up through implication, through subtext, through what she is not thinking about and not doing, rather than things that she is doing and is thinking about explicitly. And that's a layer of complexity I've chosen to have in my writing. I did want to write something where there would be reread value. I didn't want to write a book that was the kind of thing you would just read once, and because everything was so surface level, you didn't get any additional layers of meaning when you went back and reread it. And so that's a deliberate choice I've made as an author. I am really hoping that I get some other beta readers who are going to be able to pick up on some of the subtext and what's going on in the scene, because if they don't, then I either suck at subtext and I need to throw it all out and make it more explicit, which I really don't want to do, or I don't have the right beta readers, in which case I need to go find a whole pile more just to make sure I'm really hitting the point, at which point I'm going to have to push back my publication schedule. And I really don't want to do that either, because I would like to get this published at some point in the first half of this year. So we shall see. I feel like a lot of people come in with an expectation of like, oh, a terrible thing has happened. Obviously, everybody needs to be like, catatonic or incapacitated with grief, or like sobbing their eyes out, or, unable to focus on anything. And it's just like, no, if you're a high performing team, you don't go to pieces in that moment. After you have that split second emotional reaction, you literally compartmentalize everything else and you move on and you get the job done, because the priority is to get the job done. That was what I was trying to convey in this particular scene. Obviously, it didn't work for this reader and they did not like that. And that's fine for them not to like. But the thing for me to consider is whether or not I've done enough in the scene to telegraph that the reason that they're not falling to pieces or whatever is because they're doing this. I guess if you've never really been in a kind of high pressure situation where you really need to just get the job done no matter what the cost is, I can understand how without something additional in the narration, you kind of fail to get there as a reader. So there are definitely pieces of feedback in this that is very valid. And the other thing as well is this is just one reader's opinion. I don't have any more data from other beta readers yet, so I need to not leap to any conclusions until more people have been through it. So I am going to hold off on deciding what my revisions are going to be for the scene. However, I can safely say that I am probably not going to put as much internal monologue and reflection as this reader probably would want. And I'm saying that because throughout the manuscript consistently, there have been a lot of moments where there is a lot of subtext in the scene and this person has not picked up on the subtext. And if I were to address every single one of their comments in the way that would make this reader happy, it would probably change the manuscript to the point that I would not be happy with it. I would feel like it would have lost a level of complexity and nuance that I personally really want there to be in this particular book. My rule of thumb here is if one person disagrees with you, then that's their opinion and that's fine. I'll generally just say, thank you for the feedback. I understand that's your experience. This has been my experience and I've written this scene in a way that's authentic to my experience and it's great. Thank you for sharing your experience and giving me honest feedback. If I have 2 or 3 people giving me similar comments or comments of a different nature but in the same scene or on the same character or plot point, then I kind of start going, okay, I think I need to take a closer look at this. And if I have like 4 or more people all telling me the same thing, then I go, right, I need to do something about that. When I saw this comment, I was a bit confused because I thought I had been very clear in signaling the passage of time because the previous chapter had a big subheading that said 5 years ago. Clearly, this had been missed by this particular beta reader, so I went and got some more data points. I asked somebody else whether they had missed the heading. They had, and then I changed something about it, and one of the people who went through it at a later point got really confused about the time skip as well. When so many people have been confused about the time skip, I know I definitely need to do something about that in revisions. What I try to remember is it doesn't matter what my intentions were when I wrote the words. If I have written the words in such a way that the majority of people are not interpreting the words the way I want them to, the problem isn't with them, it's with how I've written the words. If 80% of my beta readers are telling me that this passage does not land them in the emotional place that I want them to be, then I have to change it until it does. How do you guys usually deal with feedback? Let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear your thoughts. I do have one final tip in terms of dealing with beta reader comments, and that is do not do what I'm doing right now, which is to jump in every time I get an email alert saying that somebody has left a comment for me because it is driving me insane. I'm gonna work really hard on not looking at any beta reader feedback until I've finished illustrating my second children's book, which is overdue by like 6 months at least. Ultimately, your work does have to stand on its own, which is why reader feedback is so critical to figuring out if you are becoming a better author. It is a huge part of how I measure whether or not I've successfully hit my KPIs for NaNoWriMo 2021. If you're curious as to how I set my goal and KPIs, then you should check out this video next.